Uh, Welcome. My defense topic is network assisted multi-homing for emerging heterogeneous wireless access scenarios. It's a big name, so I'll start with what is multi-homing. So, in the most general terms, what we mean by multi-homing is any network attached entity having multiple interfaces through which they can connect to the internet. So, I'll explain later what I mean by a network attached object, but for the most simplistic scenario, you can consider your laptop or your smartphone, which you can use Wi-Fi to connect if you have Wi-Fi access points around, or you can use the LTE to connect to the LTE and cellular base stations. So, in a sense, these devices already have multi-homing capabilities, and my research topic is how to use these multi-homing capabilities in the devices and allow simultaneous use of the interfaces together so as to improve user performance. What is different from the proposed approaches is that it's a network assisted multi-homing. By that I mean the usual proposed mechanisms. You propose end-to-end multi-homing, wherein the end users, the onus lies on the end users to start the flow and stripe the flow across multiple interfaces. But what we are proposing that the users can work whatever way they want to. The routers within the network would take the burden of how to best utilize the interfaces which are available for the user. So, the motivation for the entire work. Right here you have quite a well-known plot by Cisco Visual Networking Index. What it shows is that with every year, the years are around here, it's 2012 to 2017, the amount of data required by the devices are increasing, and it's increasing at a very high rate. At the same time, the majority of the devices which are using it or will be using it in the coming years are smartphones, laptops and tablets. These devices already have multi-homing capabilities with them. Your smartphone already has a radio access, an 802.11 card, and it already can access the LTE. Laptops, you can plug in multiple LTE dongles and you can connect to multiple ISPs. Tablets, they also have similar plots where they're saying that in the coming year, most of the tablets will come with LTE capabilities. So we see at one point, the hardware to use multiple interfaces is going down. It's becoming more and more affordable, and more devices are coming with hardwares by which you can use multiple interfaces. At the same time, these devices will be requiring more and more data. So the main aim of this work is how would the routers utilize the functionality which is already present in these devices to better serve them. When we look at the device or the user incentives, why would we as users want to use these functionalities? For start, if you have multiple interfaces, essentially you have diversity, which means you can get at an affordable price various connectivities from various ISPs and you can use them simultaneously. So even if, say, you have AT&T and Verizon and AT&T network is congested, in the worst case you can switch to Verizon and use their network and still get the same throughput which you were getting. If both the links are good, you can actually think of using them together so that you can stream video at a faster rate or you can download files at a faster rate. So essentially you get the diversity. If you want, you can use the two interfaces together to get the same data for high reliability. If the data you want is very sensitive and you want very reliable data transfer, you can use the interfaces together to have high reliability. And essentially you could get faster download, upload speeds and better throughput if you actually use the two interfaces and stripe the data. I'll explain what I mean by striping data in the following slides. So, the requirements, the main requirements to set up such a system which would allow the use of multiple interfaces. For the first thing, data striping. What it means is you have one flow coming in, and at some point in the network you find there are two paths which are available by which you can reach the same destination. So you can segment the flow into multiple flows and set them out through the network, and when they reach the destination, they will be again reordered into a single file or a single flow and pushed to the application. So if you use multiple interfaces, you'll get higher throughput. What it also requires, another major point, is estimation of path quality. If you have multiple interfaces, and you have no idea how the paths are, the multiple paths through the network are, the striping point would have no idea at what rate to stripe. If you have a file, should you make it stripe it out in 3:1 ratio? It has to have some estimate of how the path is to determine at what ratio it needs to stripe the flow and send it through multiple interfaces. The third point is dynamic change of flows. This is not so important if it's a static user. So if I am inside WinLab and my laptop is just lying here, so my laptop is not moving, you won't probably, if I'm downloading a video, throughout the entire download time my laptop will be here, and then there would be no change of flow through the network. But if it's a highly mobile user, if it's a vehicle moving through a road, for example, and it comes across Wi-Fi access points and LTE base stations, then while it's downloading something, it may so happen that the vehicle moves out of range from an access point, comes in range of another access point. So the network has to manage the flow while the user is moving and while its interfaces are changing, which is a very dynamic scenario considering how mobile our devices are and how mobile the devices are becoming nowadays. The final point, this is something which we allow in our system architecture, but something which is not really allowed by any other proposed techniques, which is essentially giving the user some flexibility as to how you want to use the interfaces. For example, my cell phone might have a data usage limit. So I might be willing to receive from both the interfaces at all the time, but if my usage limit is reaching its maximum limit, I might want to use only Wi-Fi for some applications. Right now, with all the proposed techniques, they don't allow this flexibility for the users to allow the use of single interface or both interfaces. It also does not allow actually applications to propose, to express their policies. So if I'm doing a very reliable file transfer, I have no way of letting the server know that I want the same data from all the interfaces. Or if I'm doing a high quality video streaming, I have no way of letting the server know, send me interleaved or data stripe data through all the interfaces so that I can stream the video faster. So these are the main requirements for the system architecture. Next, I would like to briefly describe what the proposed IP-based techniques are and how we are different from those techniques. So what you have here is an example scenario where you have a host Y who was connected to the internet using an LTE base station and a Wi-Fi access point. As soon as it comes in range of those points of attachment to the internet, it does a DHCP request, and it gets two different IP addresses across its two interfaces, which are IP-A and IP-B. If it wants to stream a data from host X, which is a server at some other point in the network, it actually needs to explicitly let the host know what are its IP addresses, what are its interfaces, and it's willing to receive data from all these interfaces. So there has to be a direct control channel going through. There should be an exchange of control messages by which the end-to-end flow needs to be established first, before even the striping or the flow starts. Once host X comes to know that there's some other host Y with these two IP addresses and it wants data from both the interfaces, it would have to, the burden lies on the host, the end user, to determine at what rate it needs to stripe the data and how the data will flow through the network. The routers essentially act as dumb nodes, where all they do is they get a packet addressed to IP-A and it knows which interface to send it out, another packet for IP-B and they know which interface to send it out. The problem, like I said, if host Y moves out of range and it comes in across another access point, then again it will get a new IP address and it has to again do the entire procedure where it has to go back to the server and say, I have a new IP address, don't send it to IP-A, send it to IP-C, for example. What we propose. So our proposed architecture is based on mobility first. So we are using some of the key features which Mobility First provides us. It is a clean slate architecture, so it is quite different from whatever the current TCP/IP or end-to-end architectures exist in the internet today. I've described in greater detail what are the features we are using, but on a large scale, what the key unique feature is that hosts have unique IDs which are constant throughout the lifetime of the host. So as long as host Y connects to the internet, it will always have a unique ID by which anybody within the network can address it to. So how does anybody in the network know where host Y is located? There is a sort of in-network service which we call the Global Name Resolution Service. You can think of it as a central database which anybody in the network can access, and what host Y would do, it would keep its current update mapping of where it's located and its ID in the GNRS so that anybody in the network can query at any time and find the up-to-date locations. So this is what happens. Host Y connects to the internet, gets it for GUID Y, it updates in the GNRS what its current point of location is, and host X can access it directly through the GNRS. What host X can also do is it can get the user's current policy, which could be used send me only through Wi-Fi or send me through both, immediately by accessing the GNRS. Host X doesn't need to know where the host Y is located, or it doesn't need to know as such how to send the data out. It would just push whatever data it has into the internet, and the routers would be determining which is the best path to send the data out, and the routers would be striping data as and when necessary. The routers also have hop-by-hop routing, so it's a hop-by-hop reliable transfer, by which we mean there's no end-to-end flow, but every router gets reliably a part of the data and then transfers it to the next hop. If necessary, if the next hop link is down, the routers can store the data temporarily and forward it when the link becomes good. So these are the key differences from the proposed architecture. I would go on into details of the naming and the transport, which are the main features which we are using for our striping algorithm. So, like I mentioned before, network attached objects. What do we exactly mean by network attached objects? It includes a broad range of devices. It could be a single device like a smartphone or a tablet. It could be a smart car having multiple interfaces. It could be a sensor. It could even be a group of devices. So I could have a GUID, and I can have a laptop and a smartphone together within that GUID. There's a host naming service which does the name resolution. What it means is it converts the human readable name into a unique ID, which it does from the public key so that it's secure. And so every device would get its unique GUID from a human readable name, and this is done by the naming service. Once it gets the GUID, which as mentioned, it's unique and it's long lasting and it's flat, it doesn't depend on the location. There's the GNRS, which is the in-network service. This GNRS stores this mapping, and anybody in the network can actually access the GNRS to know the current mappings. The transport, another key feature which we are using in our striping algorithm. The routers transfer data hop by hop in chunks. It concatenates large number of packets together to make a chunk, and then it reliably transfers it to the next hop before transferring the next chunk. So before transferring a data, a router sends a C-sync message, gets an ACK back, and then sends the data. Once the data is sent, the next hop sends an ACK back saying what all packets of the chunk I have received. If there are some packets missing, it has the chunk already in its storage, so it sends those chunks out. So it's a reliable transfer. There's in-network storage, like I mentioned, and finally the ACK withholding mechanism. So the transport is based on hop protocol, and hop protocol has this unique ACK withholding mechanism by which they do congestion and flow control in the network. What really happens is every router keeps monitors a per flow count of how many pending packets it has how many pending chunks it has in its buffer, and it doesn't accept chunks if the number of pending packets are too high. So what it means is, say for example, the we keep coming back calling the backpropagation threshold as h. So say for example, this router has a backpropagation threshold of h number of chunks, and it's receiving at a rate RU from its uplink router, and it's sending at a rate RD. Now if RD is much less than RU, chunks would keep storing in its pending buffer because it can't push it out as fast as it's getting the chunk. Once it has H pending chunks, it stops sending csync acts for the csync of the next chunk, such until it can push one more chunk out. What this essentially means is, as it can push one more chunk out, it would accept a newer chunk. So the entire flow gets saturated to the flow of the minimum rate possible throughout the path. So after a while, once it has H possible chunks, RU would essentially become equal to RD. So we are using this phenomenon. I'll show you in an animation how we do the striping algorithm. But first I'd like to show you how we are tying all this up together using multiple interfaces, network storage, and how the network decides to stripe in an overview example. So here you have a car which comes across an access point, finds a network, associates with it, and immediately through the network it uploads to the GNRS that its current point of attachment is NA1. So any server which wants to send data sends it out to the network does a lookup and sends the data through NA1 to the car. As the car moves, it might reach a region where there is no connectivity. There was pending data here, there was pending data here. These data get stored because they find there is no point of attachment of the current vehicle. So this is where in-network storage comes into play. Next, when the car comes in range of another access point, it uploads to the GNRS, my new point of attachment is this. So the pending data, if any, was there back at the server, as well as the pending data which was in some other network, automatically gets rerouted to the new point of association. So the end host doesn't have to worry about how to send the data out. The routers take care of how to stripe the data or how to send the data to the correct point of attachment.
So how does that automatically happen?
I'll be explaining the algorithm. So basically the routers...
So you're going to talk about it in a moment?
Yeah.
Alright, I'll wait.
Okay. So finally, this is a scenario where it comes across two points of attachment and it uploads that I have 2 points of attachment, and the network decides what's the best way to send the data across both. So we would be actually concentrating on this part where the main algorithm is how to stripe the data if you have multiple interfaces available, and how to send the data in the best possible way to the user. Which brings us to the striping technique. So the server sends the data out directed to a GUID, the GUID of the destination. The first router does a lookup, finds the set of network addresses, and puts them in the chunk header. We are using the routing information, but only to the level of finding what the next hop is for these network addresses. So we are not doing any link quality estimation. Whenever a router gets a chunk, it looks at the network addresses and sees if all the next hops to these network addresses are the same or not. If they are same, it just keeps forwarding the data till you reach a router within the network where it finds the 2 next hops are different. So it needs to stripe the data. What it does is, it randomly selects one of the paths and sends the chunk out. And as it gets more chunks, it pushes it through the other flow. Here, the backpropagation threshold comes into play. If you are pushing at a rate higher, then you can send it out, and every router has pending chunks in its buffer. What essentially happens is, the flow saturates to the minimum possible data rate across each path. So essentially, the striping router just wants to push out data as it comes up from its upstream router, and the routers downstream stop accepting data once it has pending chunks, till the flow saturates to the rate at which you can push it to the user. So probably it will become more clear if I show it in an animation, which is a similar scenario. I'll be showing exactly how the striping takes place in this case. So you have a sender sending a chunk to GUID Y, which is currently associated to 2 points of attachment, NA1 and NA2. the first router, it arrives at the first router does a lookup. And what it does, it puts both the network addresses in the header and pushes the chunk out. The next router gets it and sees both NA1 and NA2 have a common hop, so I can just push the chunk out as is. So it does that. When it comes to a point of bifurcation, this router realizes if I have to send it to NA1, it has to go through this path, and through NA2 I have to go through this path. So what it does is, it pushes the first chunk out towards NA1, it puts NA1 in the header and pushes the chunks out. The routers downstream would see this chunk is directed to NA1 and it would just automatically forward it. The next chunk similarly goes through NA2.
So who did the next chunk get labeled NA2?
So the striping router determines, as every chunk it gets, it looks at the headers and it determines which way to send it out.
So what header do they have when they come from the source?
It had, so the source just send it with no network address. The first router does a lookup and puts both NA1 and NA2. And that keeps going till you reach a bifurcation point. So what you see here is, it's pushing at a higher rate. And when it reaches the edge, the rates are different. So because it's moving at a slower rate, the backpropagation comes into play, wherein this router slows down the upstream router, this slows down the upstream router, and the same happens for all the links which are available. And at the end, what you see is the backpropagation keeps going back upstream until it reaches the striping router, and the striping router would be forced to slow down at a rate which is the sum of the rates of the two paths. And it's not just two, it could be multiple paths. Essentially, once the backpropagation comes in, every router would slow down to the rate at which it can push out to the next hub. And at the end, the entire flow slows down to the rate by which you can push it to the client. So,
how many animation commands are in this? In here? It's a loop, right? Like, how many times do you think we see the loop? Like, is it 2 or 3 seconds?
Yeah, so that was 3 seconds, 2 seconds, I think. But,
I'm almost dizzy watching, trying to see, well, like, where is it repeating?
But as long as you can understand how
Yeah,
it
that's
works.
pretty good.
Okay. So, the problem. What we implemented this algorithm, and what we saw was that the throughput was quite good. It could use all the available interfaces and it could gain almost the maximum of what it would, maximum possible data rate through the links. But when the chunks arrived at the user, they were grossly reordered. And the amount of reordering varied depending on the simulation scenario which we were considering. So, we also observed, like, if the application wants in-order chunk delivery, the chunks are arriving out of order, and there might be chunks which arrive through the faster interface but which can't be pushed out to the application because some previous chunk is coming through the slower interface and it has to wait for it. This, in the worst case, would actually slow down the entire application throughput to the throughput of the slowest path, which is not what we want, because we want to use both the interfaces and achieve a sum of the throughputs. Also, if the application has buffer constraints, packets would be dropped. So in essence, it wouldn't. So in essence, packets arriving through the faster interface need to be resent again because they were dropped and because there was not enough space at the application. We observed that if the paths were similar, the amount of reordering was less. If the striping paths were similar, the more disparate the paths were, the more the striping suffered due to reordering. We came up with the solution of out-of-order striping. What it essentially means is the striping router monitors the rate at which it's pushing the chunks out across both the interfaces. So if backpropagation threshold has settled in, the rate at which it's pushing out through both the interfaces is the end-to-end data rate by which the client is accepting data. So it can gain some idea as to what rate the client is getting data and which of them is the slower interface. It tries to send chunks from the back of the queue across the slower interface such that, with the intuition that when they actually arrive at the application, they would arrive in order. Because it's from the back of the queue, so through the faster link, you'll have the first bulk of the chunk, and from the back of the queue, you'll have the slower chunk. something like this, where if the path quality is exactly the same. So this is an idealistic scenario. It's like the striping router by magic exactly knows what the path quality is and what it can do if it knows exactly what the path quality is. It starts with 1 and 2 and they arrive at the same time. It starts with 3 and 4, it arrives at the same time. So essentially you have no reordering. You get it at the exact chunk IDs. But consider another scenario where path 2 is 3 times as slow as path 1. What happens? It starts with 1 or 2, sends 1, 2 is still going, it sends 3, it sends 4, and by the time it arrives at the client, even though 3 and 4 arrived first, it has to wait because chunk 2 came across the slower path. The solution? What we said is it would send chunks from the back of the queue across the slower interface. So if by magic the striping router knew path 2 is 3 times as slow as path 1, it would put chunk 1 through the faster path, and instead of sending the first chunk at its queue, it would send the third chunk from the front of the queue across the slower path. And you can kind of guess what will happen if it sends 4 out, then 1, 2, 3 will go through the faster path, and 4, which was sent from the back of the queue, would arrive through the slower path, and when it arrives at the application, there would be no reordering. So this is an idealistic case. What the striping router does, it tries to estimate this data rate, and it's very good if there's no mobility.
The striping router tries to estimate this. What word did you use?
Yeah, estimate the data rate, whichever path is slower and how slow the path is, depending on how fast both the next hops are demanding chunks. So if the client is static, this would be very good. But for dynamic scenarios where the path quality is changing dynamically, it constantly tries to estimate. It looks at the past 1 second what my next hop is demanding and tries to optimize this process to reduce the reordering. So we won't get zero reordering, but we would still get reduction than what we would get if we just sent chunks out. So
how do you say 1, 2, 3, 4 is better than 1, 3, 4, 2?
Because 3 and 4, if you consider a file which has been segmented into chunks, 3 and 4 are later parts of the file and they arrive before 2. So if the application wants it in order, if you want a video stream, you want in order supply of data, 3 and 4 would be lying somewhere below the application in a buffer waiting for 2 to arrive.
So you have some metric for that, right?
Yes, I have. I'll be explaining it during my evaluation. So we come to evaluation. So all the evaluation was done using Network Simulator 3 simulations, and we did 3 basic throughput analysis, parametric evaluation where we evaluated how much reordering happens and due to what parameters of the link, and finally we plugged the 2 together and did a realistic simulation with heterogeneous access scenarios to show the benefits. What you have here is the entire NS3 modules and how they work. So NS3 has its own Wi-Fi modules, its own LTE modules, and its own Ethernet modules. So I used the basic modules which were already there. On top of it, so an issue which I had was Wi-Fi didn't support any handoff mechanism. Excuse me. So there was no way I could make initially the chunks to go through from one access point to another. So I had to write a separate piece of code, a separate module which looked at the MAC layer to find right now where the user is located and upload it in the GNRS and tweak it accordingly so that the handoff occurs smoothly. I also did the GNRS portion of the simulation, which was allowing every packet to be addressed by source and destination GUIDs, and all the packets to pass through the network as that, and have a flexible header space where you can put in the network addresses. And finally the striping algorithm, which I just described. I also did a couple of applications which could use all this together, and we'd see the gains. So the baseline simulation scenario, it's quite simple. It's sort of the car example which I keep coming back to, where you have a straight road and a car moving, and you have randomly placed Wi-Fi access points, and you have some LTE base station which provides coverage throughout the area. We assume the LTE coverage is stable, but it's much poorer than what you would get within Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi, on the other hand, provides you data rates from 6 to 54, but it's highly varying as the vehicle moves. So here we assumed a uniform random variable as the distance between Wi-Fi access points. For this case, it's 300 to 500 meters. So a Wi-Fi access point usually has around 125 meters of coverage area around it. So if you have a uniform inter-AP distance to be a uniform random variable between 300 to 500, what it means that the Wi-Fi coverage is intermittent. So as the vehicle moves, it will come across regions where there is Wi-Fi and LTE, and then it's just LTE, and again another access point which would provide it some hotspot for some coverage for some time. So yes, the code to edge links we kept as 10 millisecond constant delay, and there's a backend server from which the client is requesting data from. So the first analysis what we did, this was before we actually implemented the multi-homing striping algorithm. It was with the handoff mechanisms and using baseline TCP, what advantages would the mobility first based system provide over baseline TCP IP end-to-end flows. When there's a vehicle moving at 50 miles per hour, the data transfer was a web browsing scenario. So the client was randomly requesting data of sizes. It was a uniform random variable between 10 KB and 5 MB. And once the data request completes, it's wait for a random time and then request something again. And we consider two sets of inter-AP distances. So one was 100 and 300, which means there are regions where you have overlapping connectivity. There could also be regions where you have no connectivity, but there's a high probability of having overlapping connectivity for 100, 300, whereas for 300 to 500, all the Wi-Fi access points have non-overlapping coverage. And since there's no back-end LTE in this, it means it gets connectivity, then no connectivity, then connectivity. And this sort of goes on as the vehicle moves across the road. And clearly you can see, for disconnected scenarios, mobility first actually provides significant gains. This is because TCP is end-to-end, and the flow breaks down once you move out of range. And then the client has to set up the flow all through again. We assume a smart application, so we assume that for TCP, even if the flow breaks down, the application knows when to start from. So it starts from the point it broke down, and again the flow starts. And the median gains is pretty good for baseline mobility first, where you have no multi-homing. Next we moved on to, now if you have multi-homing capabilities and you can actually use multiple interfaces, what extra gains can you get? We didn't simulate any MPTCP or any sort of multi-homing on TCP IP on NS3, but our baseline study showed that even for baseline scenario, it would have improvements. So what can we do now that we have multiple interfaces? So it's the same scenario. This time there's an LTE base station, and you can connect to both if you want to. The vehicle is moving at 10 meters per second. You have the aggregate throughput versus time. So the vehicle was demanding data continuously. And these are separate simulation runs. One was the vehicle's policy was to use only LTE. One was it could only use Wi-Fi access points. So it got a coverage, then there was no coverage, then it came across another AP and there's another jump there. And finally, what would it gain when it uses both the interfaces together? The green line is actually a theoretical sum. It's not a simulation result. It's basically a sum of these two, which means essentially if a vehicle started two different applications, one using LTE and one using Wi-Fi, and it didn't stripe the data across multiple interfaces, what could you get? So what we see here is actually the blue line closely follows what's the maximum you can get if you don't stripe.
So why is there's a small gap between green line and blue line from the time of 70 seconds to 100 seconds?
Yeah, so what I guess could be happening is that it's the way the GNRS is set up. So the GNRS gets an update every time you make a new connection. It's not when you break a connection, right? So for when you have just the Wi-Fi access point, when it moves towards the edge of the access point and it sends a CSync and the CSync is lost, it tries to resend a CSync. Before that, it does a GNRS lookup to find out if there's some other interface, if the vehicle is located somewhere else. It finds no, it's still located to itself. So it tries to send it again. And towards the edge, there are some losses, but it manages to send a few more chunks. When you consider multiple interfaces, when it fails to send a CSync, it does a GNRS lookup and finds, oh, there's an LT connection I can read out to. And it actually sends the chunk through the lower LT connection. Whereas probably it would have been better if you could have sent it through the AP. It would have lost some packets, but eventually the throughput would have been better. So you see a slight change, and that's when the gap. After that, when you have LT, it's again parallel.
So there's kind of a very small gap between the first time, and then there's a slightly bigger gap.
So
and if you went past another set of empty, no AP, and then another,
so because this is
would the gap grow again?
So
like
one thing is probably it's also because it's an aggregate. Could it be like?
Yeah, the aggregate is
So,
once you fall behind, you never can.
Yeah.
So is it that you'll see each one of these times
I
where
have
you
to run it. I don't know.
you aggregate some little loss associated with this?
Probably. From the maximum what you can get. But that is the theoretically what the maximum you can get. And it's not when you're
Do you
striping.
think this gap here is worse because it's at the end of your experiment? In some way, how did you end your experiment?
I
did
just,
it just end at 100 and the car
yeah.
stopped?
Yeah, I just stopped the simulation at 100.
So at 100, did you just leave packets in
Whatever it was, I just
buffers, and you just said, well, I got this, and that's.
Yeah, that's basically it. I looked at the client, whatever it received till that point.
So you notice, like at the end, where you see the blue was running a little behind the green at the first one, but then it caught up again.
Yeah.
Maybe if you run
Maybe
longer here,
it could have
does some
caught up.
catching up. I mean, you asked my question. That's kind of the most mysterious thing here.
Yeah, probably I should run it. See something.
So if you have this hypothesis about where that's coming from, do you have a way to fix it?
So it would depend on, because the GNRS update is, the AP is not updating, it's the client who is updating when it gets a new interface, right? So the only way to fix it would be, I don't know, even for the multiple interfaces, it's saying that I failed to send a packet, probably because the client was at the edge and there was some losses. Probably I should try again, although there's a new interface available, but I don't think that, I don't think you can generalize it as such, right? It could very well be the client is out of range.
I think if you continued it, you'd close some of that gap, just like you did
Just
before.
like-
Because somehow you're saying you put too many packets on the LTE interface,
Yeah, so,
right, in that transition period.
yeah, the Wi-Fi thinks there's a loss and it's reroutes through the
But if you
LTE.
were running longer, right, then your back pressure thing would kind of fix that. It would allow that to empty and run at maximum speed, and would put more packets on the Wi-Fi, and
Yeah,
you're not wasting resources, so you want to catch up mostly.
yeah, nothing is getting lost as such.
Okay.
The next one. This is the same scenario, but it's a fixed data transfer. And what we have here is different speed of the vehicle, and it's requesting a file, which is a uniform random size between 60 to 88 bytes, and it's requesting at random times. And what I have here is the average time it takes for the file transfer to complete when you use just LTE, or you use just Wi-Fi, or you use striping and you send across both the interfaces. So there is actually, so what you see for lower speeds, but it also depends on the size you're requesting. If the vehicle is moving too slow and the entire file transfer completes in one association instant, the gain which you get of using another interface which is not that of comparable data rate, the gain is not that much as what you'd get if the vehicle is moving faster and the association doesn't complete within one association of Wi-Fi and it uses the LTE to send the data faster. So LTE, of course, because we simulated it to be really slow connectivity, it has the maximum time of completion for each cases, whereas for higher speeds you see significant gains when you use both the interfaces together.
These confidence intervals you have shown here, those are directly from the simulation. And is that the span of, like if you take one of your confidence intervals, is that the full range of results you got when
Yes.
you ran it 100 times? Or
I actually ran it 10 times.
10 times? Okay. So,
Yeah,
there appears to be a fairly high variance in some.
Yeah, so one of the reasons you see there's a high variance for 10 meters per second, not compared to the others, and also the variance for LTE is low. The variance when you use Wi-Fi is higher. So this comes from, there are two random variables here. One is the file transfer and one is the moment when you, the instant when you ask for the file. So the way the simulation scenario was, when you come across a Wi-Fi, for the LTE you just keep requesting. For Wi-Fi, when you come across a Wi-Fi access point, you associate and wait for some random time and then request. So there were some transfers which started at a really bad time and it couldn't complete within one association instant. So you get a large time. There are other transfers for other runs which started at a really good time and it would complete within one association, one AP association. So if you fail to finish within one association, you have to wait for a longer time before you associate with another AP. So the difference in that case is large and you get a very high error bar because some transfers completed really fast, some completed after another AP came into play and the rest of the file was transferred.
But that seems like it would be worse at 5 meters per second than at 10, because this random variable about how long it is until you get to like the AP coverage is.
So it's, once you associate with Wi-Fi, you wait for some time and you send the packet out. So if you're moving really slow for 5 meters per second, depending on the size of the request, so because the size of the request was 60 to 80 MB, it completed within one association instant. But when it's 10, you're probably moving out of one, you needed 2 association for some you needed 1. So the difference becomes very large.
Seems like there's a sweet spot kind of for the gains that we get.
Yeah.
The gain is max at 20 around and then it starts to go down between the blue and the green. Right?
Yeah, that was my question too. So can you just explain that a little bit?
I think it's, I mean, it would depend on the numbers of the file size and.
Oh, actually, I think it depends on the difference between LTE and the red and the green. The smaller the difference between red and green, the bigger gain the blue can have, right?
Well, the blue increases monotonically, the green flattens out at 20 meters a second. So there's something going on in Wi-Fi at 20 meters a second.
Well, it's also because the LTE becomes so slow, then adding LTE actually doesn't help that much. That happens when your speed is 5 and 30. And for 10 and 20, so the LTE is not too bad compared to Wi-Fi. So actually adding them together is beneficial.
What's the physical layer model that's used to calculate as a function of speed?
So
LTE?
LTE is the baseline wherein it basically, depending on the RBs, it has a 1 kilometers coverage area. So for the simulation it didn't change. I had 6 RBs for the LTE, so it couldn't achieve much data rate, max data rate compared to the Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi on the other hand had long distance propagation delay and loss models, and it was based on how far you are from the access point, what your data rate should be, and that varied between 6 and 54. So if you were moving really fast, that variation was really fast and you couldn't utilize that much amount of useful time at each
I
AP.
understand. So I think, but for the red line, when it goes from 20 to 30, what is the mechanism by which the file transfer time goes up?
The mechanism by which the file transfer time would...
Are you always within coverage, or are there some periods of no coverage?
For the LTE, you're always within coverage, while the Wi-Fi access points have regions of
So there must be
interference.
some slowing of the
Yeah,
speed, right?
it is with distance, it slows down, but it's kind of slow compared to the variation you get in Wi-Fi.
So But is there a velocity factor in the speed calculation, or is just distance based?
It's distance based.
I think Ray's point is that he thinks all the red bars should be the same.
It does slow down, but it's much lower.
Why? Well, but why? Why is it slowing down?
Because
always
you are
have
moving
enough.
away from the base station. You're actually moving away from the base station. It
I
has a
think
bigger
could be
coverage
if
area.
the trajectory is sort of.
So where does the car start in relation to the base station? Does it always start in the same place, the distance away?
You have the
Yes.
diagram of
Like,
You had an animation.
It was this one.
yeah.
So
So where is the base station?
the base station's I think in the middle.
Is it
base
right
station
over-
is in the middle, and you start a
Exactly.
car from 0, location. So if you have a higher speed, you're moving farther away from the base station at a faster rate.
Oh, wait, you have a, so where do you start? At the,
So
you start on the left edge?
yeah, and you keep moving in a straight line with the base station somewhere
So
in the
you
center.
start right where the left-hand car is?
Actually, you start.
You
Yes.
start in the middle.
Yeah, you start in the middle. Now that I remember, because
So that would explain.
you're constantly moving away from the base
But you
station.
never.
So as the
you
car
never go
gets
out.
faster, it
Mm.
spends
Yeah,
more
it's
time
damn
at the
free.
farther distances.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so if your speed was 0, right, you would get this really high, the best LTE speed associated with being as close as possible to the base station.
Yeah.
All right.
And then if the speed is 5, still the difference between Wi-Fi and LTE is huge, right? If we go back to
The
the,
problem with the speed is 5 is, okay, so when you start in the middle, right, and your speed is 5, at that point in the middle, are you connected to an AP?
Yes, you are.
You are also.
So you are
Because your picture shows kind
the
of you're
AP.
between
You're not.
two
You
APs.
you send the request once you're connected to an AP. You wait for some
Go
time.
look at your picture again. So your cartoon.
Yes.
So in that cartoon, it looks like there's an AP to the left of the base station and an AP to the right. And if you're right in front of the base station, are you connected to either AP?
No. So the car actually starts from here and it starts moving this way. So
Well,
you're not
no,
connected.
Put your
to
finger
this.
exactly where it starts.
This
Because
was
I think
an illustration.
this is the difference
Yeah.
of that 5 meter per second thing. Because what Yan Young says, right, is if you start, if there's an AP right in front of the base station, and it's also connected right when you start the car,
Mhm.
and you're moving really slow, that AP ought to be really fast. It should be faster, right? It's closer than the LTE base station, right?
Okay.
You have a better channel, and probably it's getting 54 megabit per second, and the LTE base station is getting some smaller number.
Yeah, around 4.5.
So
megabits.
Yan Young says, oh, then at very slow speeds, if that's the case, you finish first with the AP.
Yeah,
but you're-
and that's why you're saying like these two are comparable.
No, but she's saying the
RTE. should
oh,
be
okay,
that.
so right, so that is happening. So she is initially connected, and the AP is
And so
is
that's
much
why it's
faster
smaller
at 5
speeds.
meters.
The difference, you don't see that much
Because
of
that's the
difference.
difference in the relative speed of AP versus LTE. And then when she does both, the fact that there's a slow LTE doesn't help
Okay.
much.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
But you know, I think it says, right, you like to really explain these results, right? You have to draw a really precise picture.
I should-
Because if you drew a picture, right, where you started the car in between two APs,
yeah, then it could have.
right, then at 5 meters per second, the all AP solution is going to wait for a while before it transmits any data, and then it's going to blast the data, and it won't look nearly as good.
Oh, but this is the file transmission completion time, so it wouldn't start if there's no AP around. It would start only when there's an AP around, and it would wait for some random time.
Wait. So the file completion time isn't the time starting from 0.
No, it's the time when you're requesting a file and when you're getting it. It's the time difference
But
between
the
the two.
request isn't starting at time 0. The experiment doesn't start with it's time 0. I make a request.
It starts when you have an AP around and you wait for some, you associate with an AP and you wait and you ask for something.
So in the all AP solution, the timer for the how long it takes starts when you meet an AP and make a request.
Yeah.
Oh, I think that's not really a fair comparison. like the apples to apples comparison is really,
But it would
right
be
now
for
I want a
both.
file, and if you're gonna use all APs, I mean, that's classic. You have to wait until you're in the presence of one, and that should be in there.
So
right?
you're saying like it would have shown better. It would have shown better gates if they all started at the same time. But if you have to make a comparison with Wi-Fi only and Wi-Fi plus LTE, you should at least have Wi-Fi connection before you start the file transfer.
No, I think you're giving Wi-Fi. I didn't realize this. I thought you had random.
I don't think so.
arrival. But what you should do is randomly arrive your files and then process them.
Yeah,
If
then
if there's no Wi-Fi, then
This
doesn't
would be
matter.
this would be higher.
Your
Yeah.
application must wait. So the reality is that the application has to wait until you have Wi-Fi coverage. So this tends to favor Wi-Fi.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, that's kind of why people don't like Wi-Fi. I mean, you
Because
like the
there's-
fact that, oh, LTE, you know, you
Yeah.
click send or whatever, and it's working right away. You're not waiting around to meet some access point.
So did you also, I remember you did some different parameters, but did you do a lower density of Wi-Fi APs? This is a fairly high density, the 300, 500.
Huh. No, this is the worst case. I assume 300, 500. I did a higher
You could
density.
do another 500,
Mm.
whatever, 800.
And then Wi-Fi will be really bad probably. But
Yeah,
with
but
high,
that's the reality. I mean, if you go to a small town, that's what you get. Right?
Yeah.
In Manhattan, you get negative, you know,
Mm.
it's 300, but not.
I think our San Francisco trace
the
result
end.
shows that. Like,
Yeah, but San Francisco, New York are
Are
the
pretty
extremes,
dense.
right? Yeah. If you go to Kansas City, I bet you it's not anything like
Like, it doesn't make sense to connect to Wi-Fi for like
Kansas
2
City is
seconds.
one of the bigger cities in the US.
Right.
How does Doppler fit in this?
It's not model.
Because at 20 miles an hour, 30 meters a second, Doppler for Wi-Fi
Yes, could be
starts
significant.
becoming significant.
I think
That's why I was
it
wondering whether the green,
Yeah.
as it rolls over, whether I was a little surprised by that.
But I think your own results will be better if you take the real time of packet request rather than
yes.
forcing it to be after Wi-Fi association.
So is 30 meters per second like 60 miles an hour? Like
Yeah,
it's 90 feet per
66.
second,
Which
90
is 60
feet.
miles an hour.
Yeah. So right, you'd actually have to build some really like Wi-Fi wouldn't really.
There's
Wi-Fi
real
wouldn't
Doppler
work.
at 90 miles an hour for Wi-Fi.
You
I don't
can-
think LTE is that bad.
So I think you can check into a couple of these points, but
Yeah,
you
sure.
don't have to change your model completely, but you can put a footnote about Doppler.
Okay.
I think you have to do a kind of kind of an accurate diagram.
Yeah, that
better
I'll
in the
do.
cartoon to say how they and explain
When-
how.
okay.
Because I don't think the exact explanation of how this, you know, the experiment that generates this
It's
result
not-
is in there.
Okay. So this is the second part where we do the parametric evaluation as to what link parameters cause the most reordering and how could we tackle that. So this was what Professor Roy Yates was asking a little while back. What's the metric by which we measure how much reordering occurs at the client? It's the average buffer occupancy. This is a toy example which shows what we exactly mean by that. So if you had an in-order sequence of arrival from 1 to 10, but you actually got packets which were marked like, which had IDs like this. So it's fairly simple that if you get 4 instead of 3, you'd have 1 at your pending buffer, and then when 3 comes in, it becomes 0, and so on. So for that 10 chunk width, the average buffer occupancy could be just the average of it, and that with the size of the packet would determine on an average how much of the application buffer is being occupied due to reordering. So we considered 3 different link parameters which we figured could be causing the reordering at the client of the multiple disparate paths. The simulation scenario is of a static client. It has 2 Wi-Fi interfaces. The Wi-Fi data rate is equally located across the 2 Wi-Fi interfaces and it's not moving. And you have 2 hops from the striping router to the host. So you have a striping router which is connected to 2 Wi-Fi access points, and then you have a static client. the code lengths were 10 millisecond and the back propagation was 2 chunks. Now what we did was we kept all these factors constant and we just varied for each of these. Once we varied the data rate, so for one of the links the data rate 1:1 means both were 36 Mbps, 1:2 means one is twice that of the other, the rest were constant. And we get the blue bar diagrams. Next we do everything is same, the data rate is 36 Mbps, we change the link delay, so one of the link has 10 millisecond, the other has 20, 30 and so on. And the same with the number of hops where we keep adding more routers across one of the paths. And here you have the average buffer occupancy, which I explained before, what it means, and the ratio of the parameters. This clearly shows like the data rate is the most dominant factor which causes reordering at the client. And so the more desperate the data rates are, the more the reordering would be required essentially.
Can you, okay, so the y-axis, each 0.2 really corresponds to one chunk, right? Like 1.6 megabits in a chunk is 0.2 megabytes. 0.2 is what each of those gaps is.
Yeah, so it is on an average, it's for the entire simulation which I'm running, on an average, how much of the buffer is occupied.
So like the first blue bar at 0.2 means on average there's one chunk of reordered backlog because of reordering.
0.2
0.2 megabyte is 1.6 megabyte,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, but then just explain like this, the ratio of the parameters of the two, like in data rate. What is
So data rate is kind of approximate. So I had like 936 would correspond to 1:4, but there is nothing 1:5, so it's approximately 1:6, which is 954. And so 1:1, 1:2, I place the client such that on an average it gets that data rate from each of the interfaces.
So when
6,
you
12,
compare the
1:2.
two data rates, like 1 to 2 versus 1 to 4,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
The data rates in 1 to, like, was the data rate of LTE is 1, and the Wi-Fi is, or the other path
This is just 2 Wi-Fi X. There's no
it's
LTE.
2 Wi-Fi.
Yes.
And so the other Wi-Fi is twice the rate of the first
Yes,
Wi-Fi.
right.
When you go to 1 to 4, did you keep the first one the same and just
I-
make the second one 4 times bigger?
So it depends on the ratios. You can't get all the ratios. Like 612 could be 1:2 and 1:4 could be 936.
Okay, I'll ask the question a different way. Suppose like you did 1 to 4 and but you doubled all the rates, right? Or tripled all the rates, both rates, but
It
the
would
ratio
be-
1 to 4 stayed the same. Does that bar stay the same?
Should stay the same because essentially it depends on the reordering would depend on at what rate you are pushing it out. You would be pushing it out at twice the rate, but the disparity would still be the same because that depends
Just
on
the whole movie would run twice
Yeah,
as fast.
yeah.
Okay. And then, is that the same truth for link delay? If the link delays were in ratio 1 to 4, if you double all the link delays, does the graph, the green bar, stay the same?
So
Or does it get twice as big, or?
I think it would be, the amount of reordering would also essentially mean it's the pipe, right? How much you fill the pipe, so how much link bandwidth product essentially. So it should remain this. It should affect this reordering in the same way as it affects with the bandwidth. Yes.
I think it would affect it differently. Like you agreed, I agreed with you that, in the bandwidth case, you
Yeah.
double all the bandwidth
It should.
and it stays the same. You should get the same, like, amount.
On an average, the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. So shouldn't it be the same for the delay as well?
Doesn't seem obvious to me. Did you try the experiment?
No, I didn't try
Okay.
it on different ratios.
And for number of hops, you think it's also like
So
1 to 4, 2 to 8, you think it's the same?
So the more the number of hops, essentially, the more reordering you would get because for every hop there's a backpropagation threshold. So every hop would be having some pending chunks. So if you have 4 hops and you have 8 hops, the striping router would come to know of the actual data rate later for the 8 hop case, because every hop will have to have the backpropagation. So you'd get more reordering. So the bars, the trend would be the same, but I figure it would be higher. So come to the improvements which we get if the striping router decides to send chunks from the back of the queue by estimating which is the slower path and which is the faster path. So as I mentioned, for the number of hops, it has no control over it, because the number of hop essentially determines how fast the striping router would come to know what the link quality is. So for the variation in the number of hops, we don't actually get any advantages by sending out of order, but for link delay and for link bandwidth, we can actually reduce on an average how much the buffer is occupied by sending out of order chunks.
So in this case, can you comment on why the gain doesn't seem to hold up at 1:5 ratio?
Not really.
So is it too thin up? When the ratio becomes very high, the variance on the slow path can be quite large, and it may not be easy to compensate that, but there's some reason for that. At 1:3 or 1:4, you're able to do quite a bit of compensation. It seems.
1:5 in this middle part is
The data rate.
On the top of the data.
the gains are a little less.
As you increase the disparity.
So this experiment was run with constant rates, or was it average?
It was constant, it was static.
Okay.
The effect of backpropagation threshold, we wanted to see what would be the best value of the backpropagation threshold, which means how many chunks you'd keep at each point of association. And what we did was, it was the same scenario, but now you keep increasing the backpropagation threshold at every hop, and you see how much time the file transfer completion takes place when the client is requesting a 200 MB of file. So ideally, the value of H should be such that you're getting the downlink hop. If it suddenly becomes very good, you have enough chunks in your pending buffer to send it out, such that the router doesn't wait idle. But on the other hand, like that would entail you just keep on increasing the backpropagation thresholds to account for the link variability, so that if the link goes good, I have enough chunks I can send out. But on the other hand, like I showed, the greater the value of backpropagation threshold, the more the amount of reordering you'll get at the client. So there's a trade-off between the two, depending on how fast you want the how much you want to account for the link variability, and how much you want to pay attention to the amount of reordering at the client. So we see its maximum for H equal to 1. H equal to 1 essentially means you wouldn't accept a chunk unless you send a chunk out, which means you'd be waiting idle for a long time while you get a new chunk from the upstream before you can send it out to the downstream. And for all our simulation scenarios, 2 yielded to be a good value, because if there was minimum reordering, there was some reordering, but it was minimum. And if you consider Wi-Fi, even if the rate changes from 6 to 54 Mbps, you'll have enough chunks to send out. But this of course depends on the chunk size and the downlink, uplink, what are the data rates and the delays of the links. But for the parameters we considered, the 10 millisecond data link delay and the Wi-Fi could go at max. The LTE was a lower data rate link. The Wi-Fi could go at max 54 from 6. Pending chunks of 2 would be sufficient for our simulation scenarios.
So that was with some number of hops in each path, right?
It was, yeah, so it was the baseline case where it's just 2 hops, so the striping router has 2 access points connected to it.
So if you had more hops, do you think 2 would become a bigger number?
No, because
Like the best one would, do you think it would still be 2?
I think so. It wouldn't depend on the number of hops because it depends on the rate at which you are getting chunks and the rate at which you are pushing out. It depends on every individual router. So
I'll bet you a nickel that the number of hops matters. Because I think what happens is you have more hops in the path, right? If you have only 2 buffer positions, you create situations where you have nodes that are sitting idle.
So the edge would depend on what the maximum rate you can push the chunk out at the client, right? So if there's a Wi-Fi at the edge and at the maximum you can push out 54,
Yeah.
whatever be the previous rate, if you have enough chunks by which you can push out 54, you're fine. By the time you're pushing it out, you can get chunks from the core links which are GBPS links, so you get them really fast. So it essentially depends on the edge, like for our simulation scenario.
So your hops in between are like 10 gigabit or something.
Yeah, they're
So you're like,
core
oh, that's
links,
like 2.
all,
okay.
all would
I
depend
understand.
on the edge.
Right.
But if you had 10 plus 10 propagation delay, that would affect the optimum.
Yes, so it would also depend on the uplink delay, because the majority of the delay would be getting a chunk, sending C-sync at 10 millisecond, or whatever, 20, 100 milliseconds.
I think years ago there were papers written about this question of like how big do buffers have to be if you do this kind of hop by hop kind of back pressure thing to keep the queues busy, right? Because your problem is like you don't want to let the queues become like H equals
Too
1
empty,
is
so that
you get idleness and you're
Yeah.
wasting capacity.
Okay.
Yeah.
So finally what we analyzed was, when does it actually make sense to send across both the interfaces, even if you have both interfaces? So intuitively, if your flow is really small, probably it wouldn't actually make sense to stripe across multiple interfaces. You could just essentially use one. And the other factor, which was the dominant, we saw the data rate was the dominant factor in striping, which would affect the time it would take. If there are highly disparate paths and the flow is too small, probably it's best to send it out through the link which is 4 times as good as the other link. So what we have on the z-axis is the ratio of the time taken for completion if you use one interface or if you use both the interfaces. So what we would want is ratios higher than 1, because that would mean using both the interfaces is showing some gains. The gray plane right here is, because it's 3D, it's difficult to see, but it's at 1. So you can see on the x-axis you have the size of the requested file, and on the this axis you have the ratio of the data rates. So for very low file sizes, actually you don't get the benefits of using both the interfaces. But as the size increases, it actually makes sense to stripe. On the other hand, along this axis also, if the data rate of the links are too disparate, probably it doesn't make sense to stripe, because you wouldn't get any gains. So the bars sort of go up this way and go up that way, which kind of indicates there needs to be a soft threshold by which you determine. So a user might be willing to receive data from all, but the routers need to decide probably it doesn't make sense to send the data through all, even though the user is willing to accept it. So this is an open research question in my study, because I really don't know what the threshold should be, because it essentially depends on what the network topology is, what the file size is, because these are just numbers and these are not fixed numbers that it would be the same for some other scenario. But the best case situation would be where the routers are intelligent enough that it can determine when it makes sense to stripe.
I think your plot would be more interesting if like you colored the bar with the by coding it by its height. So like bars within a height of a certain bin would be the same color, and then
Yeah, it would
the
be
next
easier
bin,
to see.
and you would kind of see what the level sets are, of what the gains are.
Right. Yeah, and you wouldn't have to see where these
You're
are
trying to,
right.
yeah, because like here you're just using the color for like the size of
Size.
the file, right?
Yeah.
But you can kind of see, that's pretty easy to see.
Yeah, it would be more,
because it's in the
yeah,
column.
you're right.
Yeah. It only take like an hour to figure out how to reprogram that graph to do that, I think, you know.
You can't generate a nice 3D contour, just set new 3D.
We
Well,
actually
yeah,
tried
right.
contour, but it was even more difficult to see. It was like going up and down. It was easier with bars. We first did a surface contour plot, and it was kind of, with the heat map, it was more difficult to visualize. You could visualize it was going up, and this way, but with bars, it
The
became...
contour is supposed to do that though, right? They color code the height
Yeah.
at
Like
that
with the
point.
contour,
Yeah.
Yeah, but it would be
The
good to
bars
have the
are
heights.
nice to see the same size file.
So regardless of the result, I think it shows that you need to be more or less close to symmetrical, maybe 2 to 1
Yes,
in order to gain some
significant.
multi-homing, and that can happen if you mix 2 cellular or 2 Wi-Fi.
Right.
Okay, you're 20 minutes past your bedtime.
Yeah, but it's my fault, so.
So finally, so I did 2 sets of simulations. One was sort of the same scenario which I showed at the gains of using multiple interfaces, but here I plotted when you're sending out of order data and the application wants in order data, how much you have to wait till you get till you reorder the chunks and send them out to the application. So you see, while the raw throughput is a smooth curve, the aggregated throughput at the application goes in small jumps, where you're waiting for some time for some chunk to arrive, and then when you get that, you suddenly can push more chunks out and it matches the curve again. So here some chunk was missing, and then it arrived, and you had a lot of pending chunks in your buffer, you could push the rate up. But it essentially shows it closely follows the raw aggregated throughput. And the final, what we did was, we had the San Francisco taxi traces. What I did was I took the open Wi-Fi access point locations in this 1 into 2 square miles area. These are mostly Starbucks and restaurants which have open Wi-Fi access points which cars could access while they move around. And I parsed those traces. I convert these into UTM. I converted these AP locations into UTM and the car traces as well. And assume there's some central base station located at the center of this because I didn't find actual base station location. And what I did was to find out what on an average and in the maximum throughput you can gain when you have actually real vehicles moving through a real AP deployment scenario. So you have here the average throughput per second, and here you have the maximum. This maximum means at some point of time during its motion, it achieved this throughput. But on an average, the throughput was this much Mbps. And I did using only LTE, using multiple Wi-Fi cards. So you wouldn't use LTE, but you'll connect to multiple Wi-Fi access points if you have overlapping coverage. And finally, our algorithm, which would use all if there are multiple Wi-Fis as well as LTE available. What it shows is quite interesting. Like the cab numbers are random; they're just 5 random cabs from the entire trace. So when you see the maximum, you can see sometimes the Wi-Fi always actually provides better maximum than the LTE, but because the coverages are intermittent, on an average you can have a cab where on an average there is no Wi-Fi connectivity, but you have some stable LTE connectivity. So if you use all the interfaces, of course you'll get significant gains. For some cases, you had overlapping Wi-Fi coverage areas. So using only one Wi-Fi would yield you much lesser throughput than using both the Wi-Fis. And yes, so that's pretty much the plot.
I think this shows that you're getting more gains from LTE plus Wi-Fi.
Yeah,
This
at all possible scenarios.
That's because the density of the APs, you had only 30 APs in
Yes.
1 mile, half mile radius.
So,
that
but there
means
was
they're probably non-overlapping.
There were some which were overlapping, some which were non-overlapping. You can see this cab at some point came at a range where there was overlapping.
Yeah.
So when it used best, it could achieve lower than when it used multiple Wi-Fi access points. While some cabs didn't come across any Wi-Fi access points as
So
well.
this is a sizable gain, and I think people can benefit from this. Other than the study, I think there's a reality that people are using these kind of technologies all the time. So any gain, factor of 2 gain, is significant enough if you can deploy.
Yeah.
So the question is, what do you need to deploy? So something like you can implement mobility first on top of Amazon as a overlay service, for example. But somebody has to put the cash to do that.
So, conclusions? The first is what I kept on showing throughout the evaluation, that the backpropagation algorithm achieves significant throughput gains than when you're using a single interface. The parametric evaluations included, showed data rate is the dominant factor for reordering, and if the application wants in-order data, probably it wouldn't make sense to stripe if the data rates are highly disparate. And even without any link quality information, the striping router can determine what the link qualities are and can stripe intelligently so as to somehow reduce the buffer requirements, even not completely eliminate buffer requirements. From the 3D plot, it clearly showed that there needs to be a soft threshold, and the routers need to intelligently stripe and probably not stripe if the flow is too small or the rates are highly disparate. And I didn't actually get time to do any scalability studies wherein you have a large number of clients connecting, demanding simultaneous data, how much information the core router needs to have to do the striping. Or is there a better way, instead of keeping a per flow count of the data, you can have some aggregated information of 10 clients whose flows are going through some core router? That still needs to be done.